Welcome to the Cumbria Chamber of Commerce podcast, your regular update of business news and issues from around Cumbria. Find out how we support new business and help existing businesses to grow and flourish at cumbriachamber.co.uk. Now here's the Chamber's Business Engagement Manager, Julian Whittle, with the latest episode.
Hello, I'm here with Suren Thiru, Head of Economics and Trade Policy at the British Chambers of Commerce. And we're going to discuss where our economy is going in these rather uncertain and volatile times. He's in Cumbria to speak at a joint event the Chamber is running with the Bank of England. Suren, the British Chambers produces a quarterly economic survey, and it's quite an important survey because it's based on a very large sample. Around 7,000 businesses, I think, take part each quarter. The headline on the latest, which was the second quarter of the year, was quite gloomy. It was UK growth stalling amid manufacturing slowdown. Why do you think this is? Is it all down to Brexit uncertainty, or are there other factors at work?
Well, thanks, Julian. Thanks for inviting me to speak to on this podcast. So Brexit is one of the big impacts on the economy over the first half of this year, which is the first quarter. So we've seen two impacts. Firstly, the impact on uncertainty on things like investment and confidence. Yeah. That's had wider impacts on things like recruitment and investment intentions. What we've also seen is the economic cost of the political impasse, where businesses have had to prepare for no deal back in March, where they've had to stockpile, for example, and that's had a cost. So that's, for example, we've seen businesses spend their investment budgets for this year on no deal planning, which didn't happen in the end. So that's had an impact. But of course, Brexit is not happening in a vacuum. There's other factors driving what's happening in the UK economy in that moment. The wider global economy is going through a more challenging time. Last week or so, the IMF released their latest global forecast, and that shows that global growth could grow around 3.2% this year, which, if realised, will be the weakest growth in about a decade. And we're seeing sort of biggest economies, US and China, slowing slightly. Eurozone, one of our biggest markets, also slowing as well. So that's had an impact. And what's driving that? We've seen sort of the impact of the rising trade tensions around the world, particularly in China and US in particular, but also elsewhere as well. And that's having an impact. So while Brexit is one part of what's happening in the UK, there's a global slowdown, but also there's issues around domestic cost pressures as well, impacting UK business as well. So the cost of doing business in the UK has gone up quite a bit over the last couple of years. And that ranges from business rates to employment costs. All these things have been ramping up. So actually, a lot of what's happening here at the moment is actually domestically focused and globally focused. Of course, Brexit is another major factor. There's a major unknown, particularly when you're looking at forward-looking planning for a lot of businesses.
Yes, and it's we know it's having an impact on investment decisions. Now, the Bank of England has just downgraded its forecast for growth. This year down from 1.5% to 1.3%, and next year down from 1.6% to 1.3%. And obviously the bank's forecasts work on the assumption that we have a smooth Brexit, not a no-deal Brexit. Do you agree with the bank's assessment?
Yes and no. So their forecast for this year, 1.3%, as you quite rightly say, is now in line with our own forecast. We're forecasting the same growth this year. We're slightly more pessimistic over the next couple of years because we think, as I mentioned earlier, the after effects of what we've seen this year will impact on growth over the next couple of years, particularly investment and trade. So we've got slightly weaker growth over the next couple of years. We'll still growth nonetheless. But what's an important thing to say is that both ourselves and the Bank of England and most other forecasters are still forecasting growth in the next couple of years. Yes. Just well below what the UK average usually, or the historic average is. So the UK economy is historically growing around 2 to 2.5%. We're seeing well below that. And we've seen that for quite a while now.
I mean, is there a danger that we could be talking the economy down? The quarterly economic survey works on balances. So on a particular indicator, let's say it's export sales, you take the percentage of firms reporting an increase and the percentage that are reporting a decrease. You subtract the latter from the former. If the balance is obviously a positive figure, then that's indicative of growth. It's quite healthy. If it's negative, then obviously there are problems. But looking at not just the last survey, but going back a year or more, overwhelmingly, although from survey to survey you see fluctuations, everything seems to be pretty much in positive territory. So, it's not, to me, it doesn't look as if alarm bells are ringing. Surely this suggests the economy is doing okay.
Well, you're quite right to say that the balances are in positive territory, so more business reporting increasing the increase in most of the indicators. But the important thing to look at when we're looking at our data, and particularly the current picture, is how it stacks up historically.
Yeah.
So you look at where we are now compared to where we are previously, and what you can see from most indicators for both services and manufacturing, most indicators are really weak by historic standards. So, for example, take the manufacturing sector, for example, and domestic orders are in positive territory, as you say, but they're still, when you compare historically, it's as weak as level since 2012. And similarly with export orders for the manufacturing sector, it's at its weakest level for about 4 years.
Yeah.
So when we look at it where we are compared to where we've been previously, it is fairly weak. And you think, and that's what a lot of our indicators, particularly manufacturing sector, are back to a sort of 2012 levels, and that's a period when the UK economy was moving in the positive direction. And what we're seeing at the moment is many of the balances trajectory, particularly for manufacturing, is going downwards. So while you quite say they are in positive territory, the direction that the indicators are going in, and also how they stack up compared to historic trends, means it's fairly weak. And I should say the survey data from the Core Economic Survey does stack up quite well with some of the other business surveys out there, which show a similar picture to what we're seeing in here. And manufacturing sector is struggling, and the service sector that's fairly subdued, and that's reflected in our own data. Now, of course, we'll have the official economic growth figures for the second quarter this Friday, and that's likely to show quite a weak picture for the second quarter of this year.
Yes, because the first quarter was boosted by Brexit stockpiling, wasn't it, ahead of the March deadline?
No, absolutely. So we like to see a bit of payback from that. I mean, it could be a small contraction. We think there's still going to be there's still enough life left in the service sector to make sure that it's probably going to be either a slight increase or zero growth in this year. And that sort of points to, if you take those two quarters together, it will be sort of quite a subdued picture, which again is in line with what we're seeing in the Core Economic Survey.
Yeah, so weak growth, but we have a new Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who's committed to taking the UK out of the EU on October the 31st, with or without a deal. Do or die, I think, is the phrase he used. We've seen the pound decline further since his election, obviously in anticipation of that. Do you foresee any other short-term impacts as the Brexit deadline approaches?
Well, it's worth looking at first the impact of the weaker sterling, and we saw in the aftermath of the referendum the impact of sterling on inflation, and it didn't really help exports either, because a lot of exports also import as well, so that kind of nets itself out. And I think what we are seeing is, because there's lack of a clear path forward in Brexit, and potential and growing anxiety over no deal and the impact it could have on the economy, that businesses are a lot of them putting off big investment decisions. They've been putting them off since the start of the year, almost, given that we've been essentially on a rolling cliff edge from March to where we are now. So businesses have been putting off in long-term investment decisions, and then to reallocate staff elsewhere, from day-to-day activity, from growth activity to enacting plans to guard against the chaos of potential no-deal exit. And that's had a real impact on investment, on cash flow in particular. So we've seen cash flow really tighten for a lot of businesses, particularly in manufacturing, and that's a real concern, because that's in many ways the key indicator that we track in our survey, for example, because that's a key indicator of business health. And if that's on a downward trend, that's a real concern.
Okay. Now, the British Chambers of Commerce took a neutral stance during the EU referendum campaign, but we've been clear since that a no-deal Brexit is undesirable. What do you see as the main dangers and risks to the economy of no deal, and what steps should the government be taking to minimise those risks?
Well, the impacts of no deal, given that, as we talked about earlier, that the UK economy remains quite a weak growth trajectory, could be quite significant. Now, in terms of where it would be impacted, so we poll our members of this in terms of how they react to a no-deal scenario, and what they overwhelmingly showed was that they would cut investment, cut recruitment, and maybe look to move part of their business overseas. So it would have a real impact. But in terms of its impact on the wider economy, it's essentially going to be a bit of a supply side shock. things like this is about things like not being able to get things through borders, delays of borders, all these sort of things. So that can have a wider impact in the economy as well. Now, having that sort of impact in the economy can be quite a significant impact on growth. We can grow quite significantly, particularly around trade and investment. And that could mean that the UK's growth path could be much weaker than it is currently at the moment.
Now, the Bank of England's Governor, Mark Carney, has singled out some sectors. I think he mentioned automotive, transport, food and chemicals as being, if you like, the most vulnerable in the event of no deal. In fact, he even went so far as to say the business model is effectively is ruined and that it would no longer be viable going forward. Do you agree with his analysis, and would you add any other sectors to that list?
Well, there is certainly certain sectors that will be impacted, but the automotive industry is quite interesting. That the plans that the government put out around the new tariff regime in the event of a no deal, actually is quite a mixed picture for the automotive industry. So if you import your car parts from the EU, then you'll benefit because you'll get the parts tariff free.
Right.
But if you then complete the car and try to sell it into the EU, then you'll be paying tariffs at the other end. So it's actually quite a mixed picture. So it's quite a nuanced picture. But I think that the tariff regime that's been proposed, so around sort of 87% of tariffs will be zero in the event of a no deal, which means that certain sectors will be protected. Some of the dairy products and some meats as well will be protected. Other sectors like ceramics might be quite impacted by that, and steel as well. We've seen the issues with British Steel the past year, and that's one area that could be impacted quite significantly because there's a lot of cheap steel in the global market in particular, and under the current the planned tariff regime, that could be that could be really impacted.
Okay. I mean, the other side of the coin, are there any sectors that stand to gain from a no-deal Brexit? The one that springs to mind in Cumbria is that we found that some tourism businesses, after the referendum when the sterling first sort of took a tanking, they benefited from that because it's a double benefit, because the weak pound means overseas visitors find it cheaper to come. And obviously, it's more expensive for Brits to go abroad, so they're more likely to take a UK staycation. And in 2017, I think tourism had a very, very good year on the back of that. And so obviously some businesses think a no-deal Brexit might mean further sterling weakness and bring more of those benefits. So that's possible, one sector. Can you think of any, would you agree with that? And you think of any others that might benefit?
Yeah, there is certainly sort of some sectors that may benefit, particularly from weak pound. So you mentioned tourism; that's obviously the prime example of that. We're hearing that from other sort of parts of the UK as well. And there's been sort of studies which show that, for example, the weakness in the pound is making tuition fees for overseas students more cheaper, which means it's more competitive for UK universities to get in students from China or the US, for example. So there are people who would benefit from not least the weaker sterling. But of course, it's important to remember when we talk about all these things around Brexit, some of the uncertainty and stuff, the UK is still a great place to do business. Now, Forbes' annual report, or Great Place to Do Business, in 2018 had UK as number one place to do business. So even with the political uncertainty out there, it still seems great. So we shouldn't forget that. And you see, certain parts of UK that the growth of sort of tech hubs and new businesses, new technology. I think that's really important. So we should remember that UK is a great place to do business, and it's important that as we frame our sort of the post-Brexit world, that's taken account of, because that's clearly very important when you have to grow the economy over the long term.
Okay. I mean, we at Cumbria Chamber carried out a Brexit readiness survey earlier in the year, which suggested that many businesses are ill prepared for a no-deal scenario. Nearly half said they hadn't even started preparations, and many of them took the view, well, we can't prepare because we don't know what we're preparing for yet. I wondered what steps you think businesses ought to be taking at this point to prepare, or to minimise, if you like, their Brexit risk.
Well, I guess the first thing to say is that I have a lot of sympathy with all businesses, in fact, particularly at the smaller end, and the rolling cliff edge, the lack of clear path forward in Brexit, so the real impact on businesses. And a lot of businesses, particularly at the smaller end, seem to have the resources to keep planning, to have 5 or 6 different Brexit scenarios under their sort of belt to try and prepare for. Whereas large businesses is much more easier. So a lot of sympathy around that. I guess I'll talk about in terms of both from government and from business perspective as well. So from government, they need to find more answers to the practical questions that businesses want to need answers to prepare for potentially no deal Brexit. So the BCC recently produced a list of 20 questions that businesses want answering around a no deal question, and what we're doing is using that as a tool to test the government in terms of how well they're doing. And what we found at the moment is less than just over a quarter of those businesses of those questions have been answered. So I think that's clearly a concern. So a lot of questions that businesses want answering around no deal Brexit, things around trade and borders, that sort of thing, haven't been answered yet. So that's clearly important. From a business perspective, even with all this uncertainty out there, and given that we still haven't got a clear path forward, there's still stuff they can do. So one of the things we've been talking about in particular is that businesses should be doing something around sort of a Brexit health check type thing. Well, even if they're not directly exposed to the EU, they don't.
Supply chain might be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they need to look at ways of looking at sort of, I guess, a stock take of their own business, people they employ, sort of where the supply chains that they operate in, where they get the supplies from, all these sort of things, to make sure that they understand what the risks are to their business. And so the BCC have produced a Brexit checklist, which I understand is on the Cumbria Chamber website as well. So I recommend your listeners go and see that.
Absolutely.
And then again, that's a sort of good starting point. And what we'll be doing over the coming weeks is to make sure that as government push out more information around no deal, is trying to communicate that to businesses across the UK and through chambers like yourselves, to make sure that we can provide as much information as possible. And in turn, we'll be pushing government to provide the answers to questions that businesses need to help them prepare for any Brexit outcome.
Okay. Now, we mentioned the quarterly economic survey. The British Chambers also produces an annual workforce survey, which highlights the fact that employers are struggling to recruit. It's actually especially true in Cumbria, where our working age population is actually shrinking. We've got what's called a super ageing population. And we have in two Cumbrian districts, Eden and South Lakeland, have the lowest unemployment rates in the whole of the UK, 1.8% in South Lakeland, 1.9% in Eden. Now, the puzzling thing, certainly for me, is that you would expect a tight labour market and difficulties in recruitment to be driving productivity, but productivity growth remains pretty sluggish. Why isn't this tight labour market driving up productivity? Why isn't it happening?
Well, you're quite right to say that unemployment across the UK, including this region, is close to record lows. The unemployment rate nationally is 3.8%. It's lowest since the mid-1970s. But you're quite right. At the same time, productivity has been falling, and I think the story is the fact that we have such a labour market, have such a tight labour market, is actually driving weak productivity. So what we've seen in many ways since the financial crisis, so in the past decade, is that businesses have tended to hoard labour as opposed to invest. Because it tends to be cheaper. So wages, for example, have been relatively subdued in terms of growth over the last decade.
You can hire somebody and fire them, but you can't buy an expensive piece of kit, can you?
Absolutely. And so costs one side, but also risk appetite has changed as well. So businesses are more likely to hire someone rather than invest. And what we've seen over the past decade in particular, unemployment's been falling, which is of course good, but business investment's been falling at the same time. It's been really weak as well, and that's one of the reasons why we have weak productivity, is that we don't have an efficient allocation of resources. There's a number of reasons for that. I said weak wage growth, but also low interest rates as well. That's had an impact on not allocating resources efficiently. But we should also say that there's a number of other reasons why UK has weak productivity. So a lot of it's due to the makeup of the UK economy. So UK economy nationally, at a macro level, is very much a services-based economy. Around 80% of the economy is services-based, and so that's people essentially, and that's hard to get more more productivity out of that. So you can't have a hairdresser who cuts two people's hair at the same time. For example, these are the sort of an example. But where for a manufacturing sector, it's much more easier to boost productivity by getting new technology in and that sort of thing. So, for example, the steel sector is one of the most productive sectors in the UK economy. That's why it was disappointing that what happened in British Steel, for example, because that's actually one of the most productive areas of the UK economy as well. So that's probably another reason why. But also, you should also say that, when people compare the UK to other countries in terms of weak productivity, and say that we have weak productivity compared to other countries, like France, for example. One of the reasons for that is the way you measure productivity. And the thing is that France has unemployment double the rate that it is in the UK. So it was all about what sort of economy you want, really. And I think one of the things we often talk about when you talk about productivity is actually looking at how you boost productivity. And in many ways, it's about getting the basics right. So skills, improving skills, and infrastructure and financing. Those nuts and bolts when you economy basics. If you get people to go to the market quicker, you get people to work quicker, you get people with the right skills to embrace to new technology, to manage people, to be more efficient, those sort of things. Help boost productivity.
Great. Now, we've got a government that's also committed to reducing immigration after Brexit using salary thresholds to limit the numbers of people coming in. Now, we know from research that we carried out at the end of 2017 that in Cumbria there are two sectors, hospitality and food processing, that are very reliant on migrant workers. And they're concerned that the supply might dry up. Do you see a tighter immigration regime as a potential threat to growth going forward?
Absolutely. So we talked about earlier that the fact that recruitment difficulties is really high in this part of the world and indeed across the UK. And one of the knock-on effects of that is that businesses can't get the skills that they need to grow their business, to boost productivity. And that has a wider impact. So the fact that there's concerns over how the migration system can look like in the longer term, that's a real concern, because that means businesses, so the labour shortages we see at the moment could be exacerbated in the next couple of years if you don't get the migration system right. And our concern is, and you mentioned the sort of salary threshold, the 30,000 salary threshold that's been looked at. We're concerned about that because that's very much a blunt instrument, really. So the salary threshold of 30,000 looks very different in London in terms of workers who do it versus here in Cumbria. So I think that's needs to be looked at much more closely. And our view, a good immigration policy is not just about attracting the brightest and the best. It's about having a common sense approach to find the people needed to help fill in the gaps in the economy where people can't be recruited locally or nationally. And that's really important because that helps boost productivity and growth. And that's something we'll be pushing the government to look at quite closely in the next coming weeks and months.
You mentioned a little while back, sir, that the costs of business doing business have been rising. I mean, one of those is wage costs. We've seen some really quite sharp increases in the national minimum wage or national living wage, as the government likes to call it, for over 25s. And the politicians seem to be promising more of the same in that respect. Now, the rate for over 25s, I just did a bit of quick research before we did this interview. It's jumped by 22.5% just since 2015. Is this distorting the economy? I mean, are there particular sectors where this is having a disproportionate impact?
It has had an impact, not least because once you increase the national minimum wage, you increase all these sort of bandings above it.
Differentials,
differentials. It has had a sort of knock-on impact. But one thing we've been saying is that we shouldn't be looking at the increases in national minimum wage, introduction of apprenticeship levy, all these things in isolation. We should look at the cumulative impact all these are having on businesses. And what we're seeing is that the cost of employing someone has gone up quite significantly over the last few years. So wages is one area, but also other things like national insurance, like the apprenticeship levy, all these sort of things.
Auto-enrolment?
Auto-enrolment, immigration, school charges, all these sort of things. And we put on top of that some of the other costs that businesses have been facing over the past year. So the introduction of making digital, and that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with employing someone, but if you look at
business cost, isn't it?
Exactly, yes. That's had a real impact. So businesses are very supportive of national minimum wage and recognising the importance in paying people well, and that's really important. And things like apprenticeship levy, getting people trade rights and to get better jobs, better well-paid jobs. Actually, what we're trying to focus the government on is looking at how the overall impact of costs are affecting businesses' cash flow and those sort of things as well. So it has an impact. It means more costly for businesses to hire people. And we did a survey last year. You mentioned the workforce survey. We did something, looked at some of the impact of how businesses were reacting to it. And we saw businesses sort of increasing costs, looking to take lower margins as a result of this. So it has had an impact on business activity.
What about exports? We touched on this a bit earlier, but the weak pound since the referendum initially helped boost exports. I think 2017 was a decent year, but that hasn't really been sustained, has it? And would you have expected to see stronger export growth, given that sterling has been weak for 3 years now?
Not really. So I think the base this impact of weaker sterling and boosting exports probably a little bit overdone. And for some exports, absolutely, it will help them be more price competitive. But I think what we've seen is that a lot of businesses are on both sides of the fence. So they will have export more cheaply, but actually the cost of
the raw materials
has gone up as well. So that comes with benefits. And what you see, businesses who are part of global, complex global supply chains of goods move back and forth over borders tends to negate that. So I think that's an impact. And what was different between now and 2017 is that the global economy is much more weaker now than it was in 2017, particularly in key markets like the euro area. So I think that's had an impact as well. So demand for UK goods and services is inevitably weaker because of what's going in other markets around the world. So I think that's had an impact. And of course, the impact around pricing is one of a number of factors that businesses look at when looking to export, looking to they ramp up their export activity. So you're looking at things like some of the support for businesses who export isn't really there compared to other countries. Some practical level support as well. So I think we shouldn't look at it in isolation in terms of the sterling impact on exports. Actually, there's more factors that drive export growth.
And how do you see the outlook for interest rates? I mean, I think we all assumed that the next move would be upwards, but in view of what the Fed's just done and in view of the possibility of a no-deal Brexit, I think sentiment's changing on that one. What's your view?
Yeah, so in terms of our forecast, so we're expecting interest rates to hold for this year and move up to 1% next year and gradually rise after that. But of course, I think also you're saying no deal will sort of change that quite a bit. And actually, what the Bank of England have said that is interest rates could move in either direction. Could move down to help support the economy, but also if sterling does tank as a result of no deal exit, that could push inflation up higher in their terms. That may increase pressure on them to raise rates. Our view is that the Bank of England should be finding monetary stability over this period, so not moving in either direction. Because given that there's so much uncertainty out there around politically and other sort of issues out there, one thing the Bank of England should do is actually maintain stability. And that will help businesses. At least as one thing that's relatively stable, particularly over the next couple of years.
Okay. Can we finish with a bit of crystal ball gazing? I mean, what's your gut feeling about the UK economy? Are we going to survive the shocks ahead? I suppose, if I were to say, if you were running a business, would you be investing now, or would you be battening down the hatches in anticipation for a recession?
So our view currently is our central view is sort of based on a relatively smooth exit from the EU. I know it's looking less and less likely by the day, but that's our central view. And if that happens, that we think the UK economy will still continue to grow, albeit very, very weakly. But if you do get a no-deal exit, then inevitably the probability of a recession goes up. And that scenario, it's not inevitable. It's important to say that it's not inevitable. There's other factors that could impact it positively and negatively. So the global economy I mentioned, but also government policy, how government reacts to no-deal exit as well. That could help support the economy as well. So there's a number of other factors. So clearly a no-deal outcome is an unwanted outcome, but it's not inevitable that it will lead to recession. My view is that, as I said, that's my view is that UK economy is still growing at a weak rate in the next couple of years. We think that, I guess, in terms of positive sides, we think consumer spending is going to be relatively strong in the next couple of years because wages are growing faster than inflation. And so that's a positive sign.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, that investment's going to be fairly weak in the next couple of years.
Which isn't good for the long term.
No, exactly. And also trade, I think, is going to be fairly subdued as well, given the wider global picture as well.
Okay. Thanks, Suren. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for having me. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening to the Cumbria Chamber of Commerce podcast. You can find out more about how we're supporting Cumbrian businesses at cumbriachamber.co.uk and cumbriagrowthhub.co.uk. In the meantime, thank you very much for listening and watch out for the next episode, which we'll be releasing very soon.